Right now, you might feel the faint, restless hum of a tiny inner mechanism, a rhythmic ticking that never seems to stop. It is as if you are standing in a room filled with hundreds of brass clocks, each one set to a slightly different pace, all of them reminding you that you are somehow late, or missing a beat, or failing to keep your own life in perfect alignment. You try to adjust the gears of your day, tightening a screw here or polishing a lens there, hoping that, if you can just get the timing right, the persistent anxiety in your chest will finally quiet down. The air in this room feels thin, smelling of cold metal and old oil, and the constant, microscopic effort of watching every second pass has left you hollow. You have been acting as the master horologist of your own existence, squinting through a jeweler's loupe to find the flaw that keeps the piece from arriving. You are not broken, and you are not a machine that has failed its calibration. This constant internal monitoring is not a sign of your weakness, but a very human attempt to gain a sense of safety in a world that refuses to hold still. You do not need to fix anything tonight. You do not need to prove that you are capable of maintaining your life with such surgical precision. We are here to set the tools down, to let the springs uncoil, and to stop asking the heart to beat like a clock. There is a strange and beautiful paradox in this work. You have come to believe that if you relax your vigilance, if you stop checking the pace of your own growth, everything will fall into disarray. Yet, it is exactly this need to monitor and control the passage of your life that prevents you from entering it. You are trying to measure the river, but you are forgetting that you are the water itself. When you stop trying to synchronize your soul with the demands of an imaginary, relentless timer, you might find that the quiet you seek has been waiting for you, hidden beneath the noise of your own constant measurement. Let the room around you fade for a moment. You do not need to see the walls or the objects in your space. Feel the weight of your body resting against the surface beneath you, the simple, honest gravity that pulls you toward the earth. Let the tension in your shoulders, those invisible levers you have been pulling all day, slowly slacken. There is a soft, deep darkness pressing gently against your skin, like a cool velvet cloth that asks for nothing. This is not a space for achievement. This is not a workshop where you must labor over the intricate parts of your identity. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be a mystery to yourself for a while. Breathe in, not to fill your lungs for a race, but to simply acknowledge that the air is there for you. Breathe out, letting the sound of the world drift away, leaving only the steady, unmeasured rhythm of your own heart. This heart does not need you to oversee it. It does not need you to count its beats or ensure it is functioning with perfect efficiency. It knows how to be. It knows how to sustain you without a single thought of yours. You can trust this rhythm. You can trust the way the night allows things to soften, to blur, and to become simpler. There is a profound difference between the time we spend measuring our lives and the time we spend actually living them. You have been caught in the first, thinking it was the only way to ensure the second. But look at the way the shadows have lengthened in the corner of your room, quiet and unhurried. Look at the way your breath moves in cycles that do not require your permission. You are caught in a rhythm that is ancient, one that predates every clock you have ever owned. You do not need to understand how the gears align to feel the relief of letting them go. You have spent so much energy trying to be the perfect caretaker of your own progress. You look at others and you compare the speed of your unfolding, worried that you are moving too slowly, or that your internal mechanism is somehow rusted or misaligned. This is a heavy, painful weight to carry. It is the weight of wanting to be safe, wanting to be sure, and wanting to know that you are moving in the right direction. But tonight, that direction does not matter. The destination does not matter. Only the willingness to be still is required of you. Imagine you are holding a tiny brass gear, a small, jagged piece of the life you are trying to assemble. You have been turning it over and over in your mind, trying to figure out where it fits and why it seems to catch on the others. Your fingers are tired from the effort. Your eyes are strained from the light of the small, flickering lamp you keep lit in your mind. What would happen if you simply opened your hand? What would happen if you let that gear slip through your fingers and fall into the deep, dark pool of the night? It would not vanish from existence, but it would vanish from your burden. It would no longer be your task to hold it. You are moving away from the workshop now. The door is behind you, and the tools are lying on the bench, silent and forgotten. You are walking out into a wide, open valley where the air is cool and fragrant, with the scent of damp earth. There is no ticking here. There is no measurement. The moon is high and pale, casting a gentle light over the land, and it does not care about the progress of your day or the list of things you left undone. The valley is vast enough to hold all of your unfinished business, all of your unspoken worries, and all of your phantom fears. You can let go of the need to be the one who knows how it all turns out. You are not the owner of the clock, and you are not the designer of the mechanics. You are the guest of this moment, and the guest is allowed to rest. You can let the muscles of your face go loose, releasing the small, habitual patterns of worry that you have held for so long. Feel the space between your eyebrows soften, as if the cold, hard lines of a map were being washed away by a gentle rain. You are not heading toward a finish line tonight. You are heading toward a bed, a dream, and a silence that is kind. If the mind begins to pull you back to the workshop, if it tries to remind you of the tasks you haven't finished or the versions of yourself you haven't achieved, do not fight it. Fighting only creates more movement, more heat, and more ticking. Just notice it. Acknowledge that the mind is trying to protect you by keeping you alert, by keeping you solving, by keeping you busy. Thank it for its concern, and then turn your attention back to the breath. Notice how the breath is still there, waiting for you, steady and unconcerned with your plans. You are doing the work of surrender, which is much quieter than the work of fixing. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You do not need to reconcile your past or predict your future. You only need to exist here in the dim, soft reality of your own presence. The night will carry you, and the darkness will be your blanket. You are safe enough to stop. You are worthy enough to cease the search for a flaw. The life you have is already moving in its own perfect, unmeasured way, and you are finally invited to stop watching, to clock and simply join the flow. In a province, far from the noise of the capital, there lived a young apprentice who was known for his remarkable ability to keep time. He resided in a small, windowless hut nestled into the side of a jagged limestone cliff, where the air was always thick with the scent of damp moss and pulverized brass. His duty was to oversee the great chronometer, a vast, intricate network of gears and pulleys that filled the entire interior of the monastery temple. It was his responsibility to ensure that each click, each rotation, and each pendulum swing remained in perfect, unwavering synchronization with the movement of the stars. He spent his days and his nights with his eyes pressed close to a jeweler's loop, searching for the smallest imperfection in the teeth of the tiny copper wheels. If one cog moved a fraction of a millimeter out of place, he felt a sharp, electric spike of anxiety in his chest, as if the entire universe were crumbling due to his personal failure. The apprentice had not slept soundly in years. He believed that if he stopped watching, the rhythm of the world would falter and the seasons would lose their track. He kept his tools arranged in a precise crescent on his workbench, and he recorded every vibration in a leather-bound logbook that was stained with sweat and ink. One afternoon, while the sun was casting long, amber shadows across the temple floor, the head monk of the monastery arrived. He was a man who moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a drifting cloud, carrying only a small, empty wooden frame in his hands. He stood silently behind the apprentice, watching as the young man's fingers trembled while adjusting a spring the size of a human hair. The apprentice was so deep in his work that he did not notice the elder's presence until a soft, dry leaf fell from the elder's sleeve and landed directly on the delicate mechanism. The apprentice gasped, snatching the leaf away with such suddenness that he knocked a tiny brass pin into the deep shadows beneath the floorboards. His breath became ragged and shallow, and he turned to the monk, with tears of frustration pricking his eyes. He explained that he had lost the count, that the synchronization was now ruined, and that he would have to disassemble the entire assembly to find the missing piece before the next hour began. He was shaking, his pulse thumping in his throat like a frantic bird, and he looked to the elder for guidance on how to fix the catastrophe he had created. The elder did not offer a reprimand, nor did he offer a solution. He simply held out the empty wooden frame, which was roughly the size of a small mirror, and asked the apprentice to place it against the back wall of the workshop. The apprentice, confused by the strange request, obeyed. He nailed the frame to the wall and stepped back, waiting for the monk to place a portrait or a mechanism inside it. Instead, the elder pointed through the frame at the blank, rough surface of the stone wall. Behind it, he asked the young man to describe what he saw. The apprentice frowned and said that he saw nothing but stone, shadows, and the dust of the temple. The elder smiled, a soft, slow expression that seemed to reach into the very stillness of the room. He whispered that the apprentice had spent his whole life trying to build a perfect rhythm, but he had forgotten that the rhythm was only a guest in the space of the room. He invited the apprentice to stop looking at the gears for a moment and to look only at the empty space within the wooden frame. He told him that if he stared at the center of the emptiness long enough, he might see that the gears were not the source of the movement, but merely the obstacles that kept him from noticing. The silence. The apprentice felt a sudden, cool shiver run down his spine. He had spent his existence polishing the distractions, convinced that the shine of the brass was the light of reality itself. Now, he stood in the dim, golden light of the afternoon, watching the dust motes dance in the air through the empty wooden frame. For the first time, he noticed that the sound of the ticking was not a burden he had to carry, but a soft, rhythmic background noise that had been there all along, whether he watched it or not. He felt the tightness in his shoulders begin to dissipate, just a fraction, He realized that the anxiety he felt whenever a gear slipped was not a reaction to the clock, but a reaction to the fear of being seen as someone who could not hold the world together. The empty frame did not demand anything of him. It did not ask for progress. It did not measure his success, and it did not threaten him with failure. It simply sat on the wall, open and inviting, showing him that the stone was there before he started working, and it would remain there long after he stopped. The elder walked to the heavy door of the temple and opened it wide, letting the cool, damp breeze of the mountains flood the room. The air was alive with the sound of crickets and the distant rush of a hidden waterfall. These sounds were not synchronized. They were not measured, and yet they moved together in a harmony far more complex than anything the apprentice had managed to build in his shop. With a quiet, hollow sort of relief that the temple did not need his surveillance. The stars would move without his logbook. The hours would pass without his nervous intervention. The apprentice reached out and touched the empty wooden frame on the wall. The wood was smooth and aged, cool to the touch, and it felt grounding like the trunk of a tree. He had thought that he was the keeper of the time, the one who held the keys to the order of existence. Now, he began to understand that he was only a participant, a guest who had been standing guard at the threshold of a peace he was already allowed to inhabit. The ticking of the clock continued, but it no longer sounded like a countdown to his failure. It sounded like the simple, repetitive pulse of the room itself, as neutral and natural as the breathing of the forest outside the door. He looked back at his workbench. The tools were scattered, the springs were uncoiled, and the pin he had lost lay somewhere in the darkness of the floorboards. For the first time in years, he did not feel the urge to scurry after. He did not feel the need to restore the illusion of perfection. He sat down on the cold floor and leaned his back against the stone wall beneath the empty frame. He was not yet free, but he was no longer a prisoner of the count. The lesson was not in what he did next, but in the fact that he was finally willing to be still, even if the machinery of his life remained momentarily incomplete. The temple was no longer a cage of his own making, but a sanctuary, and the quiet was starting to feel like a place where he could finally, tentatively, begin to exhale. This story of the apprentice and the empty frame is not a demand for you to abandon your responsibilities or to stop caring about the rhythm of your life. It is not an invitation to become indifferent, as if the ticking of the gears did not matter at all. That would be a different kind of trap, a different kind of coldness. The wisdom here is much quieter, and it is far more compassionate than the need for total indifference. The apprentice believed that his constant vigilance was the only thing standing between him and chaos. He thought that if he let go of the loop, or if he stopped recording the movement of the stars, the roof of the temple would surely cave in. Have you ever felt that same heavy pressure in your own life? The secret, exhausting belief that if you stop monitoring your own progress, the structure of your world will simply fall apart. You have spent so much time holding the lens to your own eye, looking for the one gear that is out of alignment, that you have forgotten to look at the room itself. The Buddhist tradition speaks of two kinds of wounds. The first is the simple, inevitable pain that life brings. It is the friction of being human, the times when things break, the times when we are late, or when we feel like we are falling behind. This first pain is natural. It is part of the territory of living in a world that is always changing. But the second wound, the one that keeps you awake tonight, is the one you add yourself. It is the judgment, the panic, the frantic attempt to fix what is already broken, and the harsh internal voice that says, you should have known better, you should have been faster, you should have been more perfect. When you stare through the lens at the gears, you are adding this second wound to every moment. You are telling your heart that its natural, uneven pulse is a mistake. You are telling your mind that its occasional wandering is a failure of discipline. You have turned your life into a workshop where every breath must be accounted for and every thought must serve a purpose. This is why you are so tired. It is not the work of living that exhausts you, but the work of constantly measuring your life against an imaginary, impossible standard. You are trying to synchronize your soul with a clock that does not exist. The elder monk showed the apprentice that the gears are just objects in a space that is already whole. You are that space. You are the room in which the ticking happens. You are the stillness that allows the movement to exist. When you can see yourself as the space rather than the mechanism, the need to control the rhythm begins to dissolve. This does not mean you suddenly stop doing your work or that you abandon your goals. It means you stop identifying with the speed of the gears. You stop believing that your worth is tied to the precision of your performance. Letting go is not the act of throwing away your life. It is the act of putting down the extra weight of your own judgment. Think of how much energy you spend trying to convince yourself that you are safe because you are in control. It is an exhausting performance, and the audience you are trying to impress is only your own fear. Buddhist wisdom points out that we cling to these mechanisms because we fear the emptiness of the unknown. We fear that if we are not the ones turning the crank, we will be swept away by the current of time. But the current is already moving. Whether you watch it or not, whether you measure it or not, the moments will continue to flow. You have been trying to measure the river to prove that you are walking on water. But you are not walking on the water, you are floating in it. There is a deep, abiding safety in admitting that you do not have to hold the gears together. The universe, in its vast and silent complexity, does not require your permission to function. It does not require your anxiety to maintain its pace. The moon rises, the seasons turn, and the heart beats without your intervention. Why do you treat your own life as if it were a dangerous machine that requires your constant, sleepless surveillance? Maybe tonight you can consider that your attempts to fix yourself are actually the very thing preventing you from healing. Healing is not a project you complete. It is not a goal you reach by tightening the internal springs until they are ready to snap. Healing is the process of returning to the space where you are already allowed to exist, regardless of how fast or slow you are moving. It is that the person who is behind, the person who is failing, and the person who is lost are all simply projections of the apprentice looking through the loop. When you take the lens away, when you lay the tools on the bench, there is nobody left to be behind. There is only the presence of the night, the weight of your body, and the quiet truth of being alive. You might notice that even as we speak of this, your mind wants to go back to the workshop. It wants to start counting again. It wants to know if this feeling of relief will last until tomorrow morning. This is just the habit of the apprentice. It is not a failure on your part, and it does not mean you have not heard the lesson. It just means the mind is used to guarding the gate. You can simply notice that urge to count, acknowledge it as a familiar habit, and then return your attention to the warmth of your breath. You are not required to stop the mind. You are only required to stop identifying with its need to monitor the time. In the tradition of the Zen masters, the way to peace is often described as the act of polishing a mirror. If you polish it too hard, you scratch the surface, and it no longer reflects the truth. If you do not polish it at all, the dust accumulates, and you cannot see the light. But the middle way, the path of wisdom, is to simply wipe the surface with the gentleness of a feather. You are not trying to change the mirror. You are not trying to make it into something it is not. You are only removing the film of your own anxiety so that the light can be seen as it is. Your life is the mirror, and your attention is the cloth. Stop scrubbing so hard. Stop trying to force the image to be cleaner, faster, or brighter than it is. The image in the mirror is always changing, and that is its beauty. It is meant to be a flow of reflections, not a fixed portrait of perfection. When you stop trying to frame the image, you stop being trapped by the need to protect it. You can allow the reflection of your own life to move, to blur, and to transform, without feeling that you are losing your grip on reality. There is a quiet, steady power in the act of being present with your own unfinished state. The apprentice eventually leaned against the stone wall, not because he had solved the riddle, but because he was finally tired of running from the question. You are here tonight because you are also tired of the running. You do not need the answer yet. You do not need to know how to keep your life in perfect alignment tomorrow. You only need to know that you are allowed to sit against the wall. You are allowed to be in the workshop without working. You are allowed to be in the world without keeping count of the seconds. This is the first small step toward the freedom you have been seeking. It is the beginning of the end of your self-imposed exile from your own peace. Now, let us bring this insight into your own experience, not through logic, but through the simple act of noticing. You are sitting in the workshop of your own mind, surrounded by the ticking of 1,000 unfinished tasks. But you are not required to pick up a tool. You are not required to adjust a single gear. If it feels right to you, shift your weight just a little, allowing your body to sink deeper into the comfort of your bed. Let the tension in your jaw dissolve, imagining it as a small spring that has finally been released from its coil. Feel the weight of your hands resting on the fabric, quiet and still, no longer reaching out to grasp or rearrange anything at all. Take a slow breath, not to achieve a state of calm, but simply to acknowledge that the air is available to you. With each exhale, imagine you are putting down the jeweler's loop. You do not need to see the flaws anymore. You do not need to hunt for the tiny, microscopic errors in your progress that you believe are keeping you from peace. That magnifying lens has been the source of your strain. Set it aside and let your vision soften. Everything in the room is allowed to be blurry, unmeasured, and incomplete. Perhaps a thought arises now, something that has been pulling at your attention, a task from tomorrow, a memory of a choice you made, or a worry about whether you are keeping up. Do not push it away. Do not try to silence it, because that only adds more movement to the room. Instead, acknowledge the thought as you would a dust mote floating in a shaft of sunlight. It is just a thought. It is not a command. It is not a reflection of your worth. You can observe it, and you can see it for what it is, a temporary vibration of the mind and nothing more. Imagine you are holding a small, smooth wooden frame in your hands. It is simple, humble, and open. When that persistent thought comes, the one that tells you to start measuring or to start fixing, imagine placing it gently into the center of this empty frame. You are not keeping the thought, but you are not discarding it in anger either. You are just holding it in this open space, observing how it moves, how it flickers, and how, if you stop feeding it with your attention, it begins to fade on its own. You are the space where the frame sits, and the frame is the space where the thought rests. Neither of you is broken. Neither of you is failing. Notice how the urgency begins to cool when you stop identifying with the tick of the clock. The urge to resolve everything before you sleep is just another gear in the mechanism. When it starts to pull at you, simply notice it. You might say to yourself, with kindness, that the mind is just trying to look after you by being busy. You do not need to agree with the urgency. You do not need to follow its instructions. You can let the urgency sit there inside the empty wooden frame while you stay here, breathing in the quiet of the night. If your mind becomes restless, wandering back to the workbench to fiddle with the springs, do not feel discouraged. This is a very old habit, and it would be strange if it disappeared in an instant. Just come back to the breath. Let the breath be the anchor that reminds you of your presence. You are not a machine. You are a human being. And your nature is to soften, to rest, and to let go. There is no quota of peace you must meet tonight. There is no test you must pass. If you only manage to let go of one thought, that is more than enough. Feel the space around you expanding. The walls of the workshop are moving further away, turning into the vast, dark expanse of a mountain valley. You are still sitting against the stone wall, the same wall the apprentice leaned against, but the stone is no longer cold. It feels supportive, steady, and ancient. It is the earth itself holding you up. You do not need to be the one who keeps the structure of the world together. The earth is doing that for you. The stars are doing that for you. The rhythm of your own life is doing that for you, even in the moments when you are asleep. Return to your hands. Are they still curled into fists, ready to grasp the next gear? If they are, simply let the fingers uncurl. Let the palms rest open, facing upward, as if they were waiting to receive whatever the night has to offer. This is the posture of trust. You are letting go of the need to be the watchmaker. You are choosing to be the person who rests in the workshop, listening to the silence that exists between the ticks. The ticks are just sounds. They are not the truth of your life. If a wave of worry comes, imagine it as a soft, rhythmic movement in the river nearby. It arrives, it passes through the wooden frame, and then it continues on its way toward the sea. You are the bank of the river. You are the stillness that allows the water to flow. You do not need to reach into the current to stop the water. You do not need to chase the foam. You only need to remain where you are, breathing, settling, and accepting that the flow is enough. There is a profound, quiet strength in this. You are doing something that is incredibly difficult in a world that asks you to be constantly productive. You are choosing to be still. And in that stillness, you are discovering that you are already whole. You are not a broken watch that needs the perfect parts to function. You are a living, breathing mystery that is already perfect in its incompleteness. You can leave the unfinished tasks on the bench. You can leave the logbook closed. The world will not crumble. The sun will rise. And you will be there to meet it, having finally given your heart the rest it has been longing for. Continue to let the breath be your only guide. It is a slow, steady pulse that connects you to the earth. If you find yourself drifting, let that be okay. Drifting is not a mistake. It is the transition from the world of measurement to the world of being. You are drifting away from the workshop, away from the brass gears, and toward a deeper, darker, and more nourishing silence. This is the beginning of true rest. This is the place where you can finally stop, let go, and allow the night to hold you exactly as you are. Years later, the apprentice had moved on from the cliffside hut, finding his way to a wide, low-lying valley, where the river widened into a marshy expanse. He served as the keeper of a small wooden ferry, a craft so weathered as the sun and rain that its original color had long since faded into the silver of driftwood. His duty was to transport villagers across the channel, a task that required constant attention to the currents and the shifting sandbars beneath the surface. He was a man of quiet habits, respected for his reliability, yet he still struggled with the same old ache every time the weather turned, or the river grew restless with floodwater. He felt the familiar, frantic urge to calculate the speed of the flow, to predict the exact path of the ferry, and to hold on to the oars with a white-knuckled grip that left his joints aching and his spirit weary. One sweltering afternoon, a traveller arrived at the landing. He was an older man, dressed in the simple indigo robes of a mountain hermit, carrying nothing but a small, empty wooden bowl tucked into his sash. The sky was darkening with the promise of a severe storm, and the wind was beginning to whip the river into choppy, unpredictable waves. The apprentice, seeing the danger, immediately began to pace along the bank. He frantically measured the distance between the ferry and the far shore, trying to determine if they could make the crossing before the thunder broke. His brow was furrowed, and he was muttering to himself about the strength of the wind and the instability of the current. He looked at the ferry, then back at the river, his mind racing through 100 different scenarios, each one ending in his own failure to navigate the passage safely. The hermit stood on the wooden dock, watching the apprentice, with eyes that held the clarity of a clear mountain spring. He did not say a word, as the apprentice scrambled to tighten the ropes and check the integrity of the oars. When the apprentice finally turned to the hermit, his face was flushed with the heat of his own panic. He warned the elder that the crossing was treacherous, that the timing was off, and that they should wait until the storm passed, even though he knew he would spend the waiting hours in a state of agonizing anxiety, wondering if he was missing the best chance to cross. The hermit simply stepped into the ferry, placed his empty wooden bowl in the center of the bench, and sat down with his hands folded in his lap. He did not look at the storm. He did not look at the oars. The apprentice hesitated, his hands still clutching the wooden pier, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the weight of his own desire to control the outcome, the desperate need to prove that he was a skilled enough ferryman to outwit the river. The hermit looked up at him and asked a single, quiet question. He asked if the river was trying to drown them, or if it was simply being a river. The apprentice looked at the churning water, and for a heartbeat, he saw it not as an enemy or a problem to be solved, but as a vast, moving energy that had no interest in his personal success or failure. He took a long, slow breath, feeling the air move through his chest. His grip on the pier, he realized that the storm was coming regardless of his measurements, and that his anxiety was only adding a layer of struggle to a situation that was already challenging enough. He stepped into the ferry and pushed off from the bank. The water was rough, and the ferry lurched under the force of the wind. But the apprentice did not try to fight the current with the same panicked intensity as before. He rowed with a steady, mindful rhythm, feeling the weight of the oars in his palms and the resistance of the water against the blade. Whenever the urge to check the sky or measure the distance surged within him, he looked at the empty wooden bowl sitting between them. It was a simple object, hollow and humble, and it reminded him that his mind could be just as open and receptive as that bowl, rather than a vessel filled with the debris of his own fears. He breathed into the tension, let it dissipate, and returned his focus to the present movement of his arms. They reached the middle of the river, where the wind was strongest and the waves slapped against the sides of the boat. The apprentice noticed that even in the height of the storm, the ferry moved forward. It did not require his frantic internal dialogue to keep it afloat. He felt the rhythm of the river beneath him, and he allowed himself to move with it. Rather than against it, he noticed that his fear was still there, a soft hum in the background, but he was no longer acting as its servant. He was no longer trying to solve the storm. He was simply participating in the crossing. When they finally touched the soft mud of the far bank, the storm was at its peak, with rain lashing down in thick, grey sheets. The apprentice tied the boat to a willow tree, and he felt a sudden, profound sense of stillness settle within him, even amidst the roaring wind. He had not avoided the storm, and he had not emerged with a perfect, calculated successor. He had simply crossed the river. The hermit stepped out of the boat, retrieved his wooden bowl, and turned to thank the ferryman. He remarked that the crossing had been calm, even though the river had been wild. The apprentice realized then that the calm was not in the weather, but in his own choice to stop resisting the reality of the flow. He stood on the muddy bank, watching the hermit walk away into the rain. He did not feel the need to recount the journey, to justify his decisions, or to worry about the return trip. He simply felt the rain on his skin and the ground beneath his feet. He had lived through the crossing without the second wound of his own self-criticism. He had been present for the struggle, but he had not become the struggle itself. He turned back to his ferry, wiped the rainwater from the seat, and sat down in the quiet, empty boat. The ticking of the world continued. The river flowed, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel that he was falling behind. He was right where he was, and that was enough. He remained there for a long time, listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the wood of the boat. It was a steady, rhythmic sound, not a demand and not a critique. It was just the sound of the world, being itself. He realized that the habit of monitoring his own progress had been a way of trying to escape the vulnerability of being human, but that the vulnerability was actually the source of his strength. He could feel the cold of the rain, the ache in his muscles, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. And yet, he was not in pain. He was simply existing in all his unfinished, flawed, and beautiful reality. The workshop of his mind had finally gone silent, not because he had perfected the gears, but because he had finally left the building and realized he never needed to go back inside. The river would keep moving, and he would keep crossing, not as a master of the time, but as a friend of the journey. You have been carrying the heavy, rusted keys to a workshop that you are no longer required to manage. The mechanism of your life, that intricate ticking you once believed was your own creation, is simply a process of unfolding. When you feel that familiar, tight pressure in your chest, the one that tells you to start planning, to start correcting, or to start criticizing, you are touching the edge of a deep-seated fear. It is the fear that if you cease your constant surveillance, you will lose your way, or worse, that you will be revealed as someone who never truly understood how the clock worked in the first place. This fear is a ghost. It haunts the quiet moments, turning peace into anxiety and rest into a restless rehearsal of everything you think you must solve before the morning sun. Buddhist wisdom suggests that we live our lives in a dual layer of experience. There is the first layer, which is the sheer, raw reality of existence. This includes the moments of inevitable friction, the days where the current is strong, or the times when things break, shift, or fail to meet our expectations. This layer is simply the weather of life. It comes and goes, just as the clouds move across the valley. And it is not personal. But then there is the second layer, the one your mind builds with such exhausting care. This is the layer of your reaction to the first. It is the judgment you heap upon your own discomfort, the way you decide that, because you are struggling, you are somehow fundamentally wrong. Think of it as trying to hold a handful of river water. The first layer is the coolness of the water on your skin. That is the experience. But the second layer is the frantic, desperate effort to squeeze your fingers shut, to squeeze harder and harder, because you are terrified that the water will slip away. Your hand aches from the effort, your arm tremors from the strain, and your attention is so focused on the clenching that you stop feeling the water altogether. The suffering does not come from the water moving through your fingers. It comes from the clenching. It comes from the belief that you must somehow own the river, or that you must prevent the flow from changing, even though the flow is the only way the river exists at all. You turn your pain into an identity because you believe that if you stop holding on to it, you will have no sense of who you are. The overthinking, the replaying of past mistakes, the rehearsing of future conversations, all of these are just ways you try to prove to yourself that you are safe. If you keep the gears turning in your mind, if you keep the workshop lamp burning, then nothing can surprise you. But the reality is that the surprise has already happened, and it is happening right now in the very uncertainty of this moment. Peace is not found by building a stronger, thicker wall against that uncertainty. Peace is found by realizing that you are the space that holds the uncertainty, not the structure that is trying to deflect it. When you judge yourself for being anxious, you are adding another gear to the machine, one that grinds against all the others and makes the noise twice as loud. This is the extra weight. It is the weight of feeling that your current state is a failure of your character. You see someone else, or you imagine a version of yourself that is perfectly calm, and you use that image as a whip to drive yourself further into the workshop. You believe that if you just analyze the tension long enough, if you just peer through the lens one more time, you will find the hidden screw that holds the whole system in place. But the system was never meant to be held by you. This is why self-forgiveness is the most radical act you can perform. It is the act of putting down the lens and saying that you are allowed to be in the valley, even if you are tired, even if you are lost, and even if you are not sure how to row the boat. You do not need to earn your right to exist by being efficient, productive, or perpetually aligned with some imaginary standard. The river does not ask the boat to be perfect. The river only asks the boat to be present. You have been treating your own humanness as a malfunction that must be corrected. But what if it were actually the main event? Consider the times you seek approval from others, checking to see if they think you are moving fast enough, or if they approve of the way you handle your burdens. This too is a search for a steady point. In a world that is always moving, but looking for stability in the minds of others is like trying to anchor a boat to a passing cloud. It will never hold. The only stable ground is the stillness you can access when you stop trying to justify your existence. You are already here. You are already enough. Not because you have fixed the gears, but because you are the consciousness that notices the ticking. Maybe you are afraid that if you truly let go, you will become lazy, or you will lose your ambition, or you will stop caring about the things that matter. This is a common fear, and it is a trick of the mind. When you stop gripping the water, your hand does not become dead or useless. It becomes sensitive. It becomes capable of feeling the temperature, the movement, and the subtle shifts in the current. You become more present, not less. You start to care about things in a way that is grounded, intentional, and kind, rather than care that is rooted in panic and the need for control. The Buddhist perspective on this is very simple. We suffer because we want things to be other than they are. We want the storm to be calm. We want the river to be still. And we want our minds to be perfectly orderly. But the world is a place of storms and flows. When you recognize that your resistance to these realities is the actual source of your exhaustion, you can begin to loosen the knots. You don't have to remove the pain. You don't have to make the storm disappear. You only have to stop throwing your energy into the struggle against the weather. There is a tremendous relief in giving up the role of the master watchmaker. You are not the designer of the cosmos. You are the witness, the participant, and the friend of your own unfolding. When the thoughts come, and they will come, because that is what minds do, you don't have to follow them into the workshop. You don't have to pick up the tools and start searching for the flaw. You can watch them pass through the space of your awareness like leaves, drifting down the river, and you can let them go on their way. They have no power over you, unless you decide they are the truth of your situation. You are moving through a transformation that is not about adding anything, but about subtracting the weight. You are shedding the identity of the person who must always be in charge, the person who must always be right, and the person who must always be ahead of the curve. You are becoming the person who can sit in the quiet, empty boat, listen to the rain, and feel a deep sense of belonging to the world, just as it is. It is a slow process, a quiet peeling away of layers, and it is happening even now, in the stillness of this night. You are not lagging behind. You are arriving, finally, at the only place you have ever really been. The quiet is not a sign that you have stopped working. The quiet is a sign that you have finally begun to live. This wisdom does not belong only to the silence of a temple or the stillness of a mountain valley. It is meant for the very moments that feel the most chaotic, the times when you are rushing through the hallway of your own life, feeling as though you are perpetually one step behind. Consider the way you handle the simple friction of a modern day. You are waiting for a text that does not come, and immediately the mind begins to build a bridge of worry. Assuming silence is a sign of rejection or a signal that you have failed. This is the apprentice reaching for the loop again, desperately trying to find a flaw in the gear, convinced that if you could just decode the silence, you would be safe. But the silence is just a space. It is not an indictment. You can notice the urge to interpret it, feel the spike of anxiety in your chest, and simply breathe. You do not have to believe the story the mind is writing. Perhaps you find yourself lying awake at night, replaying a mistake from years ago, turning the memory over like a stone in your palm, wondering if you could have chosen differently. This is a very common way of trying to manage the uncertainty of your own identity. You think that by punishing yourself, you are somehow keeping the mistake from happening again, but you are not preventing the past. You are only exhausting the present. When you catch yourself in this loop, you can imagine you are holding that stone. You are allowed to look at it, acknowledge that it is a part of your history, and then choose to set it down. You are not erasing the past. You are choosing not to carry it into the bed with you, where it does nothing, but weigh down your heart and make the sleep impossible. You might feel as though you are falling behind your peers, seeing their progress through the thin, distorted lens of social comparison. The mind wants to measure your life against theirs, as if your journey were a race where someone else winning means you have lost. This is a fragile way to live. When you feel that tightness, that sinking feeling of being not enough, recognize it for what it is. It is the ego trying to create a hierarchy to ensure its own survival. It is not the truth of your worth. You are not a number in a logbook. You are a human life, unfolding in its own time, according to its own rhythm. You can step off that imaginary ladder, and you will find that the ground is solid beneath you, regardless of where anyone else happens to be standing. There are moments when you smile for the world, pretending everything is in perfect order, while inside you feel heavy, fragmented, and overwhelmed. You fear that if you were to show your true state, the structure would shatter. But this pretense is the most exhausting gear of all. It requires a constant, sleepless effort to keep the facade polished. You do not have to fix yourself for others. You do not have to be the picture of complete, measured success, even in the middle of your heavy, incomplete days. You are allowed to be real. You are allowed to admit that you are struggling, and you are allowed to ask for nothing more than the permission to be tired. If you find yourself constantly checking your devices for reassurance, searching for a sign that you are doing the right thing, take a breath. That hunger for external validation is just the mind looking for an anchor outside of itself. It is a sign that you have forgotten that you are the space, not the task. Next time, instead of reaching, you might try to place your hand over your heart. Feel the warmth, the rhythm of your own pulse, and remember that this internal life is the only place where true stability resides. You do not need the screen to tell you that you are real. When you feel the guilt of resting, as if you have to earn your right to breathe, remind yourself that you are not a machine that exists to be operated. You are a living system that needs the pause to function. Rest is not a reward for work that is completed perfectly. Rest is a necessity for the unfolding of your being. You can sit in the chair, you can look out the window at the sky, and you can let your hands fall into your lap without checking the list of things left undone. The world will not stop if you stop. The sun will still rise, and the earth will continue its path, whether you are constantly adjusting the gears or simply watching the play of the shadows on the wall. This is the practice of being human. It is not about reaching a destination where you are finally finished, finally polished, and finally beyond the reach of human pain. It is about becoming the person who can stay present with the mess, with the unfinished business, and with the uncertainty, without turning it into a catastrophe. You are learning to care about the outcomes of your life, but you are learning to care without gripping the oars until your knuckles turn white. You are learning to act with intention, but you are doing so from a place of calm, not from a place of desperation. When the urge to control a situation arises, a conversation, a relationship, a project, Pause. That is your moment of awakening. In that tiny, fleeting space, before you react, you have a choice. You can follow the old, well-worn path of the apprentice, rushing to measure, to fix, to judge. Or you can take a breath, open your palms, and acknowledge that you do not know the outcome, and that you are okay with not knowing. You are giving yourself the gift of presence. You are trading the illusion of certainty for the reality of peace. Every time you choose to stop obeying the voice of fear, you are reclaiming your own mind. You are not becoming passive. You are becoming wise. You are showing yourself that you can face the storm of your emotions without being blown away. You are learning that your value is not a commodity you have to manufacture. It is an inherent part of your presence, as natural as the breath that moves in and out of your lungs. And when you stumble, when you forget, when you find yourself back in the workshop, clutching the tools, do not judge yourself. That judgment is just one more gear. Just notice the mistake, smile at the familiar pattern, and return to the silence. You do not need to be a master of the universe to be at peace. You only need to be the person who is willing to put down the lens, look at the room, and recognize that you are already safe. The ticking you hear is not a countdown. It is just the music of the present moment. You can listen to it. You can move with it. And you can eventually, when the time comes, let it guide you into the deep, dark, and nourishing rest that awaits. Your life is not a clock to be calibrated. Your life is a river to be followed. And you, dear friend, are already exactly where you need to be. The workshop is quiet now. The tools that once seemed vital are lying forgotten in the soft, dark corners of the room. You have spent so long feeling the sharp edges of every gear and spring, believing that your worth was measured by how tightly you could keep everything in motion. But look at your hands as they rest on the blanket. They are empty and they are warm. There is no brass to polish. There is no logbook to fill. The heavy iron keys that you carried in your pocket for so many years have been set aside, and you can finally feel the lightness of your own pockets. The weight you have been carrying was never a necessary burden. It was only the habit of a guard who feared the temple would vanish if he stopped his patrol. Allow your eyes to drift closed, not to shut out the world, but to turn your attention toward the deep, silent interior of your own chest. Your breath is moving like the air in a temple at midnight, slow and steady and completely unconcerned with the passage of time. In the rhythm of your lungs, the inhale carries a cool, crisp clarity, and the exhale carries away the last remnants of the day. Every time you breathe out, you are letting go of another tiny piece of the performance you felt you had to sustain. You are sinking deeper into the support of the bed, feeling the structure of your body release its hold on the day. Your shoulders are sinking, your neck is lengthening, and the space between your brows is as smooth as the surface of a still pond. The river that flows through the valley of your mind is slowing to a gentle, nearly silent crawl. You are the ferryman who has finally brought the boat to the far shore, and you are no longer looking back across the water to see if you could have rowed faster or straighter. The crossing is finished. The storm has passed into the distance, and the rain has stopped drumming against the wood. There is only the vast, calm space of the night, a space that is wide enough to hold every thought, every memory, and every intention without requiring you to do a single thing. You have been a traveler for a long time, walking with the heavy, rhythmic thud of expectation. But you have arrived here, At the threshold of the deep, dark night, where all roads end and only the silence remains, consider the wooden frame that sat on your wall. It is empty, and it has always been empty. It was never meant to hold a portrait of who you think you should be. It was never meant to frame your failures or your successes. It was simply a reminder that there is space in your life for you to be exactly who you are, without explanation, without justification, and without constant surveillance. As you let go of the frame, you let go of the need to keep looking at yourself. You are no longer the apprentice watching the gears. You are simply a consciousness, resting in the safety of a dark, cool room, breathing in the quietude that was here before you were born and will be here long after your work is done. The night is enveloping everything. It is wrapping around you like a heavy velvet cloth, shielding you from the demands of the world that keeps on ticking outside. Let the sound of the ticking fade into the background, not as a countdown or a judgment, but as the heartbeat of the building you are resting in. It is just the rhythm of the structure. Nothing more. You are not responsible for the structure. You are not responsible for the movement of the stars. You are only responsible for the breath, and even that is being taken care of by the wisdom of your own body. You are safe enough to let go. You are safe enough to stop checking the time. Think of the empty bowl that the hermit carried. It was not a sign of lack. It was a sign of total availability. Your heart is that bowl tonight. It is ready to receive the rest that the darkness offers, a rest that is not earned, but given by the simple fact of your existence. You do not need to fill this rest with plans. You do not need to occupy this time with the rehearsal of tomorrow. You are allowed to be hollow, to be soft, to be completely vacant of the need to be anything at all. In this emptiness, there is no pressure. There is only the vast, unfolding potential of a night that is designed for the renewal of your spirit. Your legs are heavy now, feeling the gravity of the earth pulling you into the center of its own stability. Your arms are loose, no longer needing to hold the oars, no longer needing to grip the tools. The heat in your palms is fading into a gentle, cool sensation, a release of all the energy you poured into trying to maintain the illusion of control. Your heart is beating with a slow, deliberate cadence, the pulse of a life that is being lived by something much larger than your own worrying mind. You are drifting toward the edge of a deep, dreamless ocean where the memories of the day dissolve like salt into the waves. There is no need to count the seconds before you drift away. There is no need to make sure you are doing this properly. If you are awake, you are resting. If you are drifting, you are resting. If you are dreaming, you are resting. The transformation is already happening. Not because you are trying to change, but because you have finally stopped trying to stay the same. You have opened the gates of the workshop and walked out into the open air of the valley. You are under the vast, unmeasured sky, where the night is not a problem to be solved, but a sanctuary to be entered. The things you thought you had to resolve are waiting in the morning, but they are not waiting for you to suffer over them tonight. They are just things, like the river, like the rain, like the wood of the boat. They are part of the landscape, but they are not the traveler. You are the traveler, and tonight, the traveler has found a place to sleep. Everything you need to be is already present in your capacity to be still. The wisdom is not a secret you have to hunt for in the dark. It is the very feeling of your own breath, the very sensation of your own skin touching the sheets, the very awareness that notices the quiet. The workshop is empty, the gear is still, the ferry is tied to the willow tree. The current continues to flow, and the moon, in its silent circular path, continues to watch over the turning of the earth. You can let the mind go dark just as the room is dark. You can let the thoughts be, like the mist that rises from the river in the morning, beautiful and fleeting, with no desire to stay. You are coming home, back to the simple, raw reality of a heart that is not afraid to stop, back to the depth of a silence that is not afraid to hold you, back to the truth that you are not a clock, but a living, breathing part of this beautiful, mysterious, and unfolding world. Is it possible that all this time, the peace you have been grasping for was simply waiting for you to realize that you were already holding it in your open, empty hands?